All right, guys, what's going on? Got a new little project to do. So we got us an LT1 intake. So back in the day, in like the 90s, into the early 2000s, the cheap thing to do to get your TPI to go faster was to convert an LT1 intake to accept a distributor and drill it for the small block Chevy intake pattern. And kind of the point of that was this has like a 4.5 or 5.5 inch runner. It's not very long, where a tune port has like, I think it's like 14. It goes from here across the manifold, up the runner, into the plenum. So less than ideal for horsepower, but it's really good for torque. These make tons of torque. These don't make as much. But a lot of higher performing engines are higher revving, so these kind of come into play later. There's a reason GM kept the short runners when they went to the LS engines. They're a little longer to make a little more torque, but not as long as these. You need a little happy medium there. So what this entails is basically, as you can see, this has 3 ports on the front. Some of the later intakes only have 2. You can make do with a lot of different things to make this work, regardless of how many ports you have. But this has 1 coolant port. That might not actually even be for coolant, now that I think about it. That may be the MAT, because the coolant doesn't actually go to the intake on an LT1. So there is going to be some figuring out here. This used to be very well documented. I'm sure there's still a little bit on like the 3rd gen forums, maybe even Corvette forums. There was an intake called LT1intake.com that has since been taken down. That had tons of resources on it. So I kind of want to make a video where we convert this one to document it on the land of YouTube forever. But the other thing is there's no water or no thermostat provision here, where this one has a thermostat. So you do have to run a remote mount thermostat. I think these, you end up having to put in a coolant bulkhead somewhere, which really isn't a big deal. On mine, I think I just have this one and this coolant temp sensor. I don't have, this is the 9th injector switch. I don't have that. A lot of the other cars don't have that. So that's not a big deal. And the other thing is, like I said, you have to drill it for the traditional small block Chevy bolt pattern. Well, my cars are Vortec headed. So this is an 85 intake. They're all angled. This one is 2, 2, and 2. I think these are Vortec pattern. If not, they're very close to Vortec pattern. So my plan is to just try to bolt this onto my Vortec heads, and we should be good in that regard. If not, drilling it isn't a big deal. The big deal, let me spin these around. This is the big deal, the distributor hole. So obviously it's not here, but the LT1 and the small block Chevy short block is more or less the same. So they still had to cover that area. So what people used to do is they get machine shops to hog this area out. There's a template you can make with the stock manifold, basically by putting a piece of sheet metal here and here and bending it, and then drilling the hole from the bottom so you know exactly where to put the hole. So then you bolt that template onto this intake underneath, drill through the metal on the bottom, and you have your distributor hole. And then you have to mill a little spacer to hold it in place. You have to add the bolt for the hold down and everything. So there is some fab work that does have to go into the back of the intake. That's usually where people hit the big hurdles. Luckily, I have a friend with a pretty capable machine shop. He's a pretty good welder. We should be able to figure out everything. And that kind of brings me to the next point, is the reason I got this intake for free is because we replaced it on a customer's car. This is off an Impala SS, and it had this mystery oil leak that was actually coming from here, where this intake was welded at some point. I don't know if it was leaking from the weld or if it was leaking from down here. You know, normally this whole area gets RTV'd, so you would think if there was some porosity here, or like there is a dip, like there's a visible low spot and you can really feel it where the weld is, I would have thought RTV would fix that. So what we're probably going to end up doing is I'm going to take the die grinder, I'm going to open all this shit up, have my buddy re-weld it, weld a little extra material here, and then we'll put it in his mill and we'll plane this thing. Hopefully make it true again, and we can go from there. So I will have to get an LT1 fuel rail for this, which isn't a big deal, but you can see the intake ports are a similar shape. This is the later style shape, so if you see a set of Vortec heads, they have this longer oval shape, where these are like a smaller square. But yeah, these are very, 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 very similar to a TPIS mini ram. If you've ever seen that intake, they look freakishly similar. There's always been rumors like that GM bought a mini ram and modified it to make the LT1 intake and all these other stupid internet things, but it does look similar. They work very similarly. If you have the means to do the machine work, it's a very cost-effective option, because you can get one of these intakes for like $40. Really, really cost-effective. So right now the plan is probably to do the work on this intake, buy a new set of heads because of things like what I've talked about in the other video, where I think my heads were decked too much and now the intake doesn't seal in this area. So I might get a new set of heads and we'll run this intake on them and we'll see what the car can do. Or I modify this intake and we put it on my Trans Am that still needs a fuel pump. We do the fuel pump, we put a cam in it, and we put this intake on it, and we see what it can do. And on the plus side, this contraption still fits, so we can have some real fun